There's a good chance the funeral home in your town, the one with a familiar last name on the sign, the one your grandparents used, the one you'd call without thinking twice, isn't actually owned by a local family anymore. It is owned by a billion-dollar corporation. And they kept the old name on purpose, because they know you'd never walk through those doors if they changed it. This is the story of how America's funeral industry was quietly consolidated by a handful of corporate giants, and why most families have absolutely no idea it happened. More than 15,000 funeral homes operate across the United States, generating over $19 billion in revenue every year. About 75% are still family-owned or independently operated. That sounds reassuring until you look at what's happened to the other 25% and what's rapidly happening to the rest. The company at the center of this transformation is Service Corporation International, or SCI. It is the largest funeral and cemetery operator in North America, running more than 1,900 funeral homes and over 490 cemeteries across the United States and Canada. In 2024 alone, SCI pulled in $4.19 billion in revenue. And unless you work in the industry, you have probably never heard of them. That's entirely by design. SCI was founded in 1962 by Robert L. Waltrip, a licensed funeral director who grew up in his family's Houston funeral business. He took the company public in 1969, listed it on the American Stock Exchange by 1970, and moved it to the New York Stock Exchange by 1974. By 1975, SCI operated 161 funeral homes across 7 major cities. But Waltrip was not building a funeral home. He was building an empire. His strategy was deceptively simple. Buy up local funeral homes, keep the original family name on the building, keep the existing staff, and capitalize on what the industry calls goodwill and heritage, the decades of trust a community has placed in a name. Victoria Heinemann, a law professor at the University of Georgia who has studied the funeral industry extensively, described the model plainly. SCI grew to dominance through mass acquisition, keeping original names in place because families associate those names with trust. In many cases, the former owners stayed on as employees. The sign didn't change. The faces behind the counter didn't change. The only thing that changed was where the money went. Waltrip also pioneered what's known as the cluster model, grouping nearby funeral homes together to share embalming operations, vehicles, and staff. One employee might work for 3 or 4 different SCI-owned homes in the same metro area, homes that still appeared to be independent competitors. This created efficiencies traditional family-run businesses simply couldn't match, and it made further acquisitions almost inevitable. And the timing has never been better for sellers to be found. A 2021 National Funeral Directors Association survey found that 34% of funeral homeowners planned to retire within 5 years, and 73% had no one to pass the business to. Nearly half of all funeral directors surveyed plan to retire by 2030. When a family name steps away, corporate buyers are often the only ones who can afford the premium price, retain the existing staff, and keep the doors open. That's not a coincidence. It's the exact condition Waltrip's model was built to exploit, decades before this current wave of retirements even began. By the early 1990s, hundreds of family-operated funeral homes across North America were being absorbed by large multinational firms. SCI was the biggest acquirer, but not the only one. Alderwoods Group and Stewart Enterprises were significant players too. SCI bought Alderwoods in 2006 for roughly $1.2 billion. then acquired Stewart Enterprises in 2013 for $1.4 billion. The Federal Trade Commission intervened on the Stewart deal, forcing SCI to sell 53 funeral homes and 38 cemeteries to resolve antitrust concerns, warning that the merger would otherwise let the combined firm raise prices unilaterally. And yet, the acquisitions kept coming. In 1999, SCI launched a consumer-facing brand called Dignity Memorial, a network tying its funeral homes and cemeteries together under one umbrella, while each individual location kept operating under its original local name. You might never see the words Service Corporation International or Dignity Memorial unless you know exactly where to look. So how are grieving families supposed to navigate any of this? Heinemann's answer is blunt. They don't behave like normal, rational consumers because death is treated as an inappropriate time to bargain shop. The data backs that up. Only 1 in 5 consumers visits more than one funeral home to compare prices, and just 18% of funeral homes list their prices online at all. The FTC's funeral rule has required providers to share pricing on request since 1984, but as of 2026, there's still no requirement to post prices online. In 2023, the FTC ran its first ever undercover phone sweep. 39 funeral homes got warning letters for inaccurate pricing, and nearly 70% of providers called outside business hours required multiple calls just to get basic cost information. Corporate-owned funeral homes consistently charge more. An analysis of 81 funeral homes in Western Massachusetts found that 25% owned by 3 consolidation firms carried higher average prices across 6 categories than their independent competitors. One case in Tucson tells the story in miniature. A cremation at Adair Dodge Chapel used to cost members $395. After Foundation Partners Group acquired the home, that pricing agreement was canceled and the cost jumped to $1,370. Karen Leonard, president of the Redwood Funeral Society, put it plainly: the bigger the conglomerate, the higher the price. The consolidation is accelerating further. Private equity has entered death care aggressively, with investment reaching roughly $15 billion in 2024 and 2025 alone. Before private equity arrived, funeral homes typically sold for 3 to 5 times annual revenue. Now, according to Barbara Kemmis of the Cremation Association of North America, the going rate is 7 to 9 times. Take Milestone Funeral Partners. It owns 77 funeral homes across New England and New York, and in some counties now controls more than 20% of all funeral home locations. That's not a company competing in a market anymore. In those counties, it effectively is the market. Robert Olthoff, who sold his family's funeral home, put the tension honestly. I can't put a dollar amount value on how much it's really worth selling to a person who is a funeral director themselves, because moving forward, your name is still going to be on the front of that building. So what can you actually do with all of this? Start before you ever need to. Ask directly. You have every legal right to ask whether a funeral home is independently owned or part of a larger corporation, and they have to tell you. Watch the name itself. Corporate roll-ups gravitate towards soft, generic words like legacy, evergreen, Oakwood, memorial, or hope. That's not proof on its own, but it's reason enough to ask. Then, shop it like the 5-figure purchase it is. Visit more than one funeral home if you possibly can. Only 1 in 5 families do, which is exactly why prices have room to run. Request the general price list. Federal law has required every funeral home to hand it over on request since 1984, no appointment and no exceptions. If a provider stalls when you ask for it, that tells you something too. And no, you have more room to say no than grief makes it feel like you do. You are allowed to leave, compare, and come back. You are allowed to decline the casket sitting under the best lighting. 61% of consumers now say they would consider a green funeral option instead of a traditional one, a sign families are already looking for alternatives the big consolidators are not built to offer. The funeral industry in America is worth nearly $21 billion. The average funeral costs between $7,000 and $12,000, and prices have climbed nearly 300% since 1986. Robert Waltrip built an empire on a single insight: people trust a name. They trust the family on the sign, the faces they recognize, the building they have driven past for decades. That trust is real. But the family behind it may be long gone, replaced by shareholders, quarterly earnings calls, and a corporate strategy built entirely on the certainty that you will never think to ask.